It's okay. Everything is going to be all right, I promise. You don't have to cry anymore.
Imagine a world where you have a glass elevator but an empty heart. That's Tamsin. Now imagine a world where you can barely afford cereal but have too much love to give. That's Lucas. When these two worlds collide over a misunderstanding in a park, it triggers a chain reaction that destroys both their lives as they know them. He becomes the father she never had the chance to see. She becomes the mother his kids lost. It looks perfect until a ghost from her past walks out of the elevator and shatters the illusion. Watch closely, because the choice Lucas makes next will break your heart. If this story resonates with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, Lucas and I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. You don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The air in the workshop smelled of cedar sawdust and lemon oil, a scent that had woven itself into Lucas Bennett's skin. He ran his hand along the edge of the oak table he'd just finished, checking for even the slightest imperfection. It was perfect, smooth, sturdy, honest work. But as he wiped his hands on his apron, the vibration of his phone in his back pocket brought the crushing weight of reality back. Another overdue notice. Lucas exhaled, a long, weary sound that seemed to rattle in his chest. Being a single dad to 6-year-old twins, Sophie and Ivy, meant he was rich in love, but constantly fighting a war against logistics and finances. He checked his watch. He was 10 minutes late to pick them up from the after-school program. Again. He grabbed his keys, locking up the small, dusty shop that was both his sanctuary and his cage. The autumn wind bit through his flannel shirt, a reminder that winter heating bills were coming soon. He needed a big contract, and he needed it yesterday. But for now, he just needed to see his girls. They were the only things that made the exhaustion worth it. 3 miles away, in a world that might as well have been on a different planet, Tamsin sat in an office made of glass and steel. The view from the 42nd floor was breathtaking, a sprawling panorama of the city bathed in golden hour light. But Tamsin didn't see the view. She saw her own reflection in the window, a woman in a $2,000 suit who felt like she was suffocating. "Miss Vane?" Her assistant's voice crackled over the intercom. "The board is waiting for the quarterly projections." "Cancel it," Tamsin said, her voice hollow. "But I said cancel it." Tamsin grabbed her coat, ignoring the frantic blinking of her office line. She couldn't be here. Not today. Today was the anniversary of the day her life had gone quiet, a date on the calendar that turned her millions into meaningless paper. She needed noise. She needed life. She needed to be anywhere but this silent, frozen penthouse. She walked out of the building, bypassing her driver, and headed toward the city park. It was a chaotic place, noisy, dirty, full of people, exactly what she needed to drown out her thoughts. Lucas arrived at the school gate breathless. Sophie and Ivy were waiting, their matching pink backpacks looking like turtle shells on their backs. "Daddy!" they screamed in unison, tackling his legs. "Hey, ladybugs," Lucas groaned, lifting them both effortlessly despite his aching back. He buried his face in their hair, smelling vanilla shampoo and playground dirt. This was it. This was why he fought. "Can we go to the park? Please, Daddy, just for a little bit," Ivy pleaded, giving him the eyes he could never say no to. "Just for 20 minutes, Lucas relented, checking his watch again. "I have to figure out dinner." As Lucas held their small hands, walking them toward the park, and Tamsin wandered aimlessly toward the same destination, the invisible threads of fate began to tighten. Two worlds, one built on struggle and love, the other on wealth and silence, were about to collide. Have you ever felt lonely even when you were surrounded by people or success? Let me know in the comments. The park was a blur of russet and gold, the noise of children playing acting as a buffer against the silence in Tamsin's head. She found a secluded bench beneath an ancient oak tree, far away from the swings and the laughter. She sat down, her expensive cashmere coat providing no warmth against the chill that radiated from inside her. She hadn't meant to cry. It started as a single tear, a crack in the dam, but within seconds she was shaking. She pressed a gloved hand to her mouth to stifle the sound, her shoulders trembling violently. She felt pathetic. A CEO, a leader, a woman who moved markets, reduced to a weeping mess on a public bench because the date on the calendar said it had been 3 years since she lost the chance to be a mother. "Excuse me?" The voice was high, piping, and close. Tamsin jumped, hastily wiping her eyes. Standing in front of her were 2 identical little girls with messy pigtails and eyes like saucers. They were staring at her with unabashed curiosity and concern. I'm fine," Tamsin choked out, her voice thick. "Please, go play." The girl on the left, Sophie, stepped closer, ignoring the dismissal. She tilted her head. "You look sad, like when Daddy burns the toast but pretends he didn't." The other twin, Ivy, nodded solemnly. "You need a hug, but we aren't allowed to hug strangers." Tamsin blinked, the absurdity of the moment halting her tears. I appreciate the thought." Ivy leaned in, whispering as if sharing a state secret. "Don't cry, ma'am. You can borrow our dad." She pointed a chubby finger across the grass toward a man jogging toward them. "He gives the best hugs. He fixes everything." "Sophie, Ivy." Lucas's voice was a mix of panic and authority as he closed the distance. He skidded to a halt, his chest heaving, ready to scold them for bothering a stranger. "I told you not to run off." He stopped dead when he saw Tamsin. He expected annoyance. He expected a woman looking down her nose at his dusty work boots. Instead, he saw a woman who looked like a shattered porcelain doll. Her mascara was smudged, her eyes red and raw, but beneath the grief, she was stunning. "I am so sorry," Lucas said, his voice dropping an octave, softening instantly. "They didn't mean to bother you." They offered to let me borrow you," Tamsin said, a wet, jagged laugh escaping her throat. It was the first time she had laughed in months. Lucas looked at the twins, who beamed up at him proudly. He felt a flush of heat creep up his neck, but he didn't pull away. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a clean, slightly wrinkled bandana he used for work. "I'm afraid I'm not much for borrowing," Lucas said gently, offering the cloth. "But I'm told I'm decent at listening, or at least providing a dry rag." Tamsin looked at the rough, calloused hand holding the bandana. It was a worker's hand, steady, scarred, strong. For a terrifying second, she wanted to take the girl's advice. She wanted to collapse into those arms. Instead, she took the cloth, her fingers brushing his. A shock like static electricity snapped between them. "Thank you," she whispered, meeting his eyes. They were brown, warm, and frighteningly kind. For a moment, the park fell silent around them. The barrier between her high-rise world and his sawdust reality thinned just enough for something dangerous to slip through.
"We do not lend people out like library books, ladybugs." Lucas kept his voice stern, but his grip on their small hands was tight as they walked away from the park bench. The autumn leaves crunched under his boots, sounding like firecrackers in the quiet tension that followed the encounter. "But she was sad, Daddy," Sophie insisted, kicking a pebble. "You fix broken legs on chairs. Why can't you fix a sad face?" "People are more complicated than chairs, Soph," Lucas muttered, though the image of the woman, Tamsin, burned behind his eyelids. The way she had looked at him, not with the usual dismissal of the wealthy elite, but with a raw, terrifying hunger, unsettled him. He felt a phantom heat on his hand where their fingers had brushed. He stopped at the edge of the park and pulled a crumpled business card from his pocket, the one he hadn't given her. He had panicked, mumbled a goodbye, and retreated. He was a carpenter who lived paycheck to paycheck. She was a woman wearing a coat that cost more than his truck. "She's not for us, girls," he whispered to himself, tossing the card into a trash can. "We stay in our lane." Meanwhile, 40 stories up, Tamsin paced the length of her living room. The silence she had sought earlier now felt aggressive, a physical weight pressing against her eardrums. She still held the bandana. It was cheap cotton, stained with a faint spot of wood varnish in the corner, and it smelled of pine and rain. It was the only real thing in her pristine, sterilized apartment. "This is ridiculous," she said aloud, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "You are Tamsin Vane. You do not obsess over a random man in the park." She moved to throw the cloth into the laundry hamper, but her thumb brushed the hem. There, stamped in faded black ink on the fabric itself, was a logo, Bennett Custom Woodworks, followed by a phone number. It was a promotional rag, the kind contractors gave out for free. She stared at the number. Her logical mind, the one that ran a multi-million-dollar conglomerate, screamed at her to put it down. Whatever happened in the park was a moment of weakness, a glitch in her programming. Getting involved with a single father, a blue-collar worker, was messy. It was illogical. It opened doors she had welded shut 3 years ago. "Don't cry, ma'am. We can borrow our dad." The little girl's voice echoed in her memory, piercing her defenses. Tamsin looked around her sprawling, empty penthouse. She had Italian leather sofas she never sat on, and a dining table made of ice that felt like ice. "I need a desk," she lied to the empty room. "A warm, wooden desk for the study." Her heart hammered a rhythm against her ribs that felt dangerously like hope. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number on the bandana. "Bennett Woodworks," a deep, weary voice answered on the third ring. Tamsin closed her eyes, leaning her forehead against the cool glass of her window. She was resisting the emotion, but she was sprinting toward the danger. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice snapping into professional coolness to hide the tremor. "This is the woman from the park. I have a job for you."
The service elevator dinged, and Lucas stepped into the penthouse, feeling distinctly like a smudge of dirt on a pristine white sheet. He carried his sketchbook and a case of wood samples, his boots squeaking faintly on the polished marble floor. "Mr. Bennett?" Tamsin said, approaching from the hallway. She wasn't wearing the business suit today. She wore a silk blouse and trousers that flowed like water. She looked softer, but her posture was rigid. "Ms. Vane," Lucas nodded, keeping his grip tight on his sketchbook. "I brought the samples for the desk, walnut, cherry, and white oak." He spread them out on her glass dining table. The contrast was jarring, the warm, textured wood against the cold, industrial glass. Tamsin picked up the walnut sample, her manicured nails tapping against the grain. She wasn't looking at the wood. She was watching Lucas's hands as he pointed out the durability of the finish. "It needs to be strong," she murmured, her eyes flicking to his. "Something that lasts." "I build things to last," Lucas said, his voice low. The air in the room grew heavy, the silence between them filled with the unspoken memory of the park bench. Suddenly, Lucas's pocket buzzed violently. He flinched. "I'm sorry, I have to take this. It's the school." He stepped away, turning his back. Tamsin watched his shoulders tense, his hands scrubbing the back of his neck. "What do you mean the pipes burst?" Lucas hissed into the phone. "I can't... No, I'm at a client's. I can't just..." He exhaled, a sound of pure defeat. "Fine, I'll be there in 20. He hung up and turned to Tamsin, his face pale. "I apologize, Miss Vane. I have to reschedule. The elementary school has an emergency plumbing issue, and I have to pick up my daughters immediately. I don't have anyone to watch them." He reached for his samples, ready to flee, expecting the dismissal. "Bring them here," Tamsin said. The words were out before she could stop them. "Excuse me?" "Bring them here," she repeated, her voice steadier this time, though her pulse raced. "You have work to do. I need this desk designed today. I have plenty of space. They can watch cartoons in the media room. Ms. Vane, with all due respect, my girls are 6. They have energy. This place is..." He gestured to a precarious crystal sculpture. "It's a museum." "It's a house, Lucas," she said, using his first name for the first time. It sounded intimate, unauthorized. "Go get them." 30 minutes later, the silence of the penthouse was shattered. The twins entered with wide eyes, looking at the ceiling-to-floor windows as if they were in a spaceship.
"Whoa," whispered Ivy. "Does the Queen live here?" Tamsin stood by the kitchen island, her arms crossed defensively. She had removed the crystal sculpture. When the girls looked at her, she didn't scowl. She looked terrified. She didn't know how to be around children, not since the accident. "Hello, again," Tamsin said stiffly. "Hi, crying lady," Sophie chirped, oblivious to the tension. "Sophie? Ms. Vane." "It's okay," Tamsin said. She pointed to the living room. I ordered pizza. It should be here soon." Lucas looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, warring with a desperate need to be helpful. She wasn't just a rich client anymore. She was a woman trying to build a bridge, however clumsily. "Thank you," Lucas said softly. "That's very kind." For the next hour, they were trapped in the same orbit. Lucas measured the study, but his eyes kept drifting to the living room, where Tamsin sat stiffly on the edge of her white sofa, listening to Ivy explain the complex backstory of a cartoon unicorn. Tamsin looked like she was defusing a bomb, but every time Ivy laughed, the tension in Tamsin's face softened just a fraction. They were together, bound by logistics and a burst pipe, but the walls were coming down.
The pizza boxes were empty, and the penthouse had settled into a comfortable, drowsy hum. Lucas was packing up his tools in the study, satisfied with the sketches. He felt a strange sense of peace. Tamsin Vane wasn't the dragon he'd imagined. She was awkward, stiff, but she had let Ivy braid in her hair into a messy plait without complaining. "Daddy, I can't find Sophie," Ivy announced, popping her head into the study. "She's probably hiding, honey. Go check the hallway," Lucas said, clicking his case shut. But the silence in the hallway was too heavy. "Sophie?" Tamsin called out, standing up from the sofa. Her voice pitched up slightly. "Sophie, come out now." A faint click echoed from the far end of the corridor, the wing of the penthouse Tamsin kept dark. Her face went drained of all color. "No," she whispered. She bolted. Lucas dropped his tool case and ran after her, his heart in his throat. They reached the end of the hall just as Sophie pushed open a heavy oak door. She stood on the threshold, frozen. "Look, Daddy," Sophie whispered, pointing. "It's a baby room." Lucas stopped beside Tamsin, who was gripping the doorframe so hard her knuckles were white. The room was bathed in a ghostly blue light from the city outside. It was a nursery. A white crib stood in the center, untouched. A rocking chair with a folded cashmere blanket sat in the corner, but the air was stale, heavy with dust. It was a room waiting for a guest who had never arrived. "Sophie, get out!" Tamsin choked out. It wasn't anger. It was pure, unadulterated panic. Lucas gently pulled Sophie back, handing her to Ivy. "Girls, go wait in the living room, now." They scampered off, sensing the shift in the air. Lucas turned to Tamsin. She was trembling, staring at the empty crib. 3 years, Tamsin whispered, the words falling out like stones. "I had everything ready. The clothes, the paint, the name. I was 8 months along." She walked into the room, her fingers trailing over the bars of the crib. "The doctors said it was a rare complication. 1 minute she was there, kicking, and then there was just silence." Lucas felt a physical ache in his chest. He looked at the woman who commanded skyscrapers, seeing only a mother with empty arms. "My fiancé left 2 months later," Tamsin continued, her voice breaking. "He said I was too much work, that he couldn't live in a mausoleum. So I locked the door. I haven't opened it since." She turned to him, tears streaming freely now, ruining the silk blouse, ruining the composure. "I have all this money, Lucas. I can buy anything in this city, but I can't buy the one thing your daughters have." Lucas didn't offer a cliché. He didn't say, "It will get better." He stepped into the room, crossing the barrier of her grief. He reached out and took her hand, not shaking it, not holding it politely, but gripping it with both of his. "You're not a mausoleum, Tamsin," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're just a mom who never got to say hello." Tamsin let out a sob that sounded like something tearing, and for the second time she collapsed. But this time she didn't fall onto a bench. She fell into him. And Lucas held her, right there in the center of the empty room,
anchoring her to the earth. Over the next 3 weeks, the dynamic shifted. The boundaries of client and contractor dissolved, replaced by something far more fragile and precious. The custom walnut desk was finished and installed, sitting proudly in Tamsin's study. Technically, Lucas's job was done, but Tamsin kept finding things that needed fixing. A squeaky hinge on a cabinet that had never squeaked before, a drafty window that required inspection, a shelf that she suddenly decided needed to be an inch lower. Lucas knew they were excuses. He went anyway. It was a Tuesday evening, raining hard against the city skyline. Inside the penthouse, the atmosphere was warm. The twins had built a fort out of Tamsin's $500 throw pillows and were currently holding court inside. Tamsin wasn't in a suit. She was wearing a pair of soft gray joggers and an oversized sweater, sitting cross-legged on the expensive Persian rug, trying to negotiate a peace treaty between a stuffed bear and a plastic dinosaur. Lucas stood in the doorway of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He had just tightened a faucet that wasn't actually loose. He watched her. The woman who had been frozen in grief just a month ago was now laughing as Ivy tried to put a tiara on her head. "You look ridiculous," Lucas said, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth as he walked over. "You look regal," Tamsin corrected, tilting her head so the plastic crown didn't slide off. "Princess Ivy says I am the Queen of Pillow Mountain." "Well, Your Highness, dinner is ready," Lucas said, setting a box of takeout tacos on the glass coffee table. They ate on the floor. It was chaotic, messy, and perfect. Tamsin wiped salsa off Sophie's chin with a tenderness that made Lucas's chest ache. He realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that he wasn't just attracted to her beauty anymore. He was falling for the way she looked at his daughters, like they were the sun and the moon. After the girls fell asleep, sprawled out in the pillow fort, too tired to move, the room grew quiet. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of Act 1. It was a comfortable, companionable hush. Tamsin stood by the window, looking out at the rain. Lucas moved to stand beside her, close enough to smell the vanilla scent of her shampoo. "You adore them, you know," Lucas said softly. Tamsin didn't look away from the window. "I adore them. They brought the light back, Lucas. I was living in the dark for so long I forgot what it looked like." She turned to him then, the city lights reflected in her eyes, making them shiver. "And you fixed more than just the desk." "I didn't do anything," Lucas murmured, stepping closer. The magnetic pull was back, stronger than in the park. "You let me borrow you," Tamsin whispered, stepping into his space. She reached out, her hand resting on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating, a steady, strong rhythm. I think I don't want to give you back." Lucas's breath hitched. He reached up, his rough fingers grazing her jawline, tilting her face up. The air crackled with electricity. He saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the question. "Tamsin," he breathed. He leaned in, her eyes closed slightly, her lips parting slightly. It was the moment the entire universe seemed to be waiting for. Then, the elevator chimed. The sound was jarring, sharp, and immediate. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. The elevator doors slid open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a suit that cost more than Lucas's annual income, with a face that was handsome but cold. "Tamsin?" the man said, his eyes sweeping over the pillow fort, the taco boxes, and finally landing on Lucas with a look of pure disdain. "I didn't realize you were running a daycare." The bubble didn't just pop, it shattered.
"Julian," Tamsin breathed, the color draining from her face. She looked like she had seen a ghost. It was him, the fiancé who had walked out when the nursery went silent. The man who had shattered her heart before Lucas had even known it existed. Julian walked further into the room, his polished shoes stepping disdainfully over a stray piece of pepperoni pizza. He looked Lucas up and down, not with jealousy, but with amusement,
as if Lucas were a stray dog Tamsin had fed. "I came to get the final signatures for the merger," Julian drawled, smoothing his tie. "But I see you've been busy. Is this the help?" The air in the room turned to ice. Lucas stood to his full height, his jaw set. He waited for Tamsin to speak. He waited for her to say, "No, this is Lucas. This is the man who makes me laugh." He waited for her to tell Julian to get out. But Tamsin was frozen. The trauma of Julian's abandonment, the suddenness of his return, and the shame of her messy, vulnerable state in front of the man who had demanded perfection paralyzed her. She looked at Julian, then at Lucas, her mouth opening and closing. He did the desk," Tamsin stammered, her voice weak. "He's just finishing up." Just finishing up. The words hit Lucas like a physical blow. The warmth of the last few weeks, the shared meals, the almost kiss, it all evaporated. In the face of her old life, he was just the carpenter. He was just the hired help. Julian chuckled, a dry, cruel sound. "Right. Well, pay the man and send him on his way, darling. We have adults to talk to." Lucas didn't say a word. The dignity he had maintained through years of struggle hardened around him like armor. He walked over to the pillow fort and gently shook Sophie and Ivy awake. "Come on, Bugs," he whispered, his voice steady but cold. "Time to go home." "Daddy?" Ivy rubbed her eyes, confused. "Is the movie over?" "Yeah, baby. The show's over." Tamsin snapped out of her trance. She took a step forward, reaching for him. "Lucas, wait! I didn't mean—" Lucas turned to her. His eyes, usually so warm, were flat and dark. He looked at her silk curtains, her marble floors, and then at Julian, who was checking his watch with bored indifference. "Don't," Lucas said. He didn't shout, he didn't make a scene, which made it worse. "I get it, Miss Vane. It was fun playing house while it lasted." "Lucas, please!" Tamsin's voice cracked, tears springing to her eyes. "It's not like that." He picked up his tool belt, slinging it over his shoulder, and scooped up a sleepy Sophie. Ivy grabbed his leg. "You said you needed to borrow a dad," Lucas said, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear. "But I think you're done with me now. You've got your real life back." He walked to the elevator without looking back. As the doors slid shut, the last thing he saw was Tamsin standing amidst the ruin of the pillow fort, looking smaller and lonelier than he had ever seen her. Do you think Lucas was right to leave, or should he have fought for her against Julian? Tell me in the comments.
The apartment was small, but tonight it felt suffocating. Lucas sat at his kitchen table, staring at a bowl of cereal that had gone soggy 20 minutes ago. "Daddy?" Lucas looked up. Sophie was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Is Miss Tamsin mad at us?" she whispered. "Is that why we can't go back?" Lucas rubbed his face, the stubble scratching his palms. "No, baby, she's not mad. She belongs to a different world, and we belong here." "I don't like here," Sophie said, her voice wobbling. "It's too quiet without her laughing." The truth of it pierced him. Lucas had thought he was protecting his dignity by walking away, but looking at his daughter's sad eyes, he wondered if he had just let fear make the decision for him. He was a man who built things to last, yet at the first sign of a crack, he had abandoned the structure. Across the city, the penthouse was restored to its pristine state. The pillow fort was gone, the taco boxes were in the trash, the walnut desk gleamed under the recessed lighting. Julian sat on the white sofa, swirling a glass of scotch. He had been talking for 20 minutes about market shares and hostile takeovers. "It's really for the best, Tamsin," Julian said, taking a sip. "You've been emotional lately, distracted. A little fling with a laborer is understandable, I suppose. Grief makes us do strange things. But it's time to get serious again." Tamsin stood by the window, her back to him. She was looking at her reflection in the glass. She looked perfect, untouchable, and completely dead inside. She thought about Lucas,
She thought about his rough hands, the way he smelled of cedar, the way he looked at her not as an asset to be managed, but as a woman to be held. She thought about the twins and their sticky fingers and the way they made this mausoleum of a house feel like a home. He wasn't a laborer, Tamsin said softly. What? Julian frowned. Tamsin turned around. Her eyes were dry, but they burned with a fire Julian had never seen before. He wasn't a laborer, Tamsin repeated, her voice rising. He was a man. He was everything you aren't. Julian stood up, setting his glass down with a sharp clink. Tamsin, you're being hysterical. I'm trying to help you get your life back. I don't want this life, Tamsin shouted, the sound echoing off the marble walls. I don't want the silence, Julian. I don't want the perfection. I want the pillows on the floor. I want the noise. She walked to the door and opened it wide. Get out. Excuse me? Get out, Julian, and take your merger with you. Julian stared at her, stunned. He adjusted his suit, sneered, and walked out. You're making a mistake, Tamsin. You'll be begging me to come back when you realize you can't play house forever. Tamsin slammed the door, the sound vibrating through her bones. She was alone again, but this time the silence didn't scare her, because she knew exactly how to break it. She ran to the study, grabbing the bandana she'd kept in the drawer, the one with the Bennett Custom Woodworks logo. She didn't need to borrow a dad anymore. She needed to claim him. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Bennett Custom Woodworks, illuminating the sawdust dancing in the air. Lucas was sanding a chair leg, the repetitive motion the only thing keeping his mind from replaying the humiliation at the penthouse. He pressed harder, the sandpaper grit biting into the wood, trying to smooth away the memory of Tamsin's silence. The bell above the shop door jingled. We're closed, Lucas called out without looking up. I didn't come for a table, Lucas. The voice stopped his hand mid-stroke. He looked up. Tamsin stood in the doorway. She wasn't wearing the silk blouse or the power suit. She was wearing jeans, stiff, dark denim that looked brand new, as if she'd bought them an hour ago, and a simple white t-shirt. Her hair was loose, tangled from the wind. She looked stripped down, real. Lucas straightened up, dusting off his apron. If you're looking for Julian, I think he prefers the Ritz. I don't care where Julian is, Tamsin said, stepping past the saw, past the lumber piles, stepping fully into his world. I sent him away, for good. Lucas watched her, wary. Why? Because he made the mistake of thinking my life was the furniture and the view, Tamsin said, her voice trembling slightly. He didn't know that the only time I felt alive in 3 years was eating tacos on the floor with you. She stopped a foot away from him, the smell of cedar and her vanilla perfume mixed in the air, the scent of their two worlds finally settling together. I was a coward last night, she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. I was afraid of the judgment, but I'm more afraid of the silence, Lucas. I can't go back to the quiet, not without you. Lucas looked at her, searching for any sign of the CEO, the client. He only saw the woman who had cried on a park bench. The anger in his chest dissolved, replaced by a fierce, undeniable hope. I come with a lot of baggage, Tamsin, Lucas warned, though his voice was soft. 2 very loud, very messy pieces of baggage. I know, Tamsin smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. I'm counting on it. She reached out, taking his calloused hands in hers. Your daughters told me I could borrow their dad, but I have a counteroffer. Yeah? Lucas whispered, leaning in. I don't want to borrow you, she said, her breath hitching. I want to keep you, all 3 of you, forever. Lucas didn't need to sign a contract. He pulled her in, kissing her deeply, sealing the promise. It was a kiss that tasted of second chances and autumn rain. Daddy, is that the crying lady? They broke apart laughing as Sophie and Ivy burst from the back office where they had been coloring. They froze, seeing Tamsin. She's not the crying lady anymore, Lucas said, looking down at Tamsin with eyes full of love. Nope, Tamsin said, dropping to her knees and opening her arms wide. "I'm just Tamsin, and I'm home." The twins squealed and tackled her, knocking her back onto the sawdust-covered floor. Lucas watched them, his girls and the woman who loved them, and knew that he was finally, truly, the richest man in the world. Thank you for watching another story of Lucas Bennett to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as wild and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So subscribe. Lucas and I will be waiting for you tomorrow.